A mother dies bringing life into the world, and while everyone thought the nightmare was over, the doctor walks back into that room and drops a bombshell that changes everything. Parents celebrating with the mistress, thinking they finally got what they wanted, but wait until you hear what happens when those hospital doors open again. Twins, 2 babies, 2 lives that nobody expected, and the chaos that follows. You won't believe how this family falls apart in seconds. Stay with me because what happens next will leave you speechless. Sarah Mitchell was 28 years old when she walked into Grace Memorial Hospital on that cold February night. She was 9 months pregnant, glowing with anticipation, ready to meet her baby. Her husband, David Mitchell, was right beside her, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement. But what Sarah didn't know, what she could never have imagined, was that across town in a luxury apartment downtown, David's parents, Richard and Margaret Mitchell, were sitting with a woman named Jessica Torres, sharing champagne and laughter. Jessica wasn't just any woman. She was David's mistress, the woman his parents had handpicked to replace Sarah. And tonight, they were all waiting for the same thing, the moment Sarah would no longer be in the picture. Sarah's labor started at 8 in the evening. The contractions came fast and hard, each one more intense than the last. David stood by her side in the delivery room, his face pale, his hands trembling. The nurses moved quickly, checking monitors, adjusting equipment, calling out numbers that meant nothing to Sarah but everything to the medical team. Dr. Helen Morrison, a veteran obstetrician with 20 years of experience, was calm and focused. She had delivered hundreds of babies, seen every complication imaginable, but something about this delivery felt different. Sarah's blood pressure was spiking, her heart rate was erratic, and the baby's heartbeat was dropping. "Push, Sarah. You need to push now." Dr. Morrison's voice was firm but kind. Sarah screamed, her body convulsing with effort, sweat pouring down her face. David looked away, unable to watch, his mind somewhere else entirely. The room filled with tension, the kind that makes seconds feel like hours. And then finally a cry, a baby's cry. The sound that should have brought relief, joy, celebration. But instead, chaos erupted. Sarah's body went limp. The monitors started screaming. Nurses rushed in from all directions. Dr. Morrison shouted orders, her hands moving faster than her words. "We're losing her. Get the crash cart. Now." David stumbled backward, his eyes wide with shock. He watched as they worked on Sarah, pumping her chest, injecting medication, doing everything they could to bring her back, but it was too late. Sarah Mitchell, a young woman who had walked into that hospital full of life and hope, was gone. The baby, a little girl, was whisked away to the neonatal unit, healthy and crying, completely unaware that her mother had just sacrificed everything to bring her into this world. David stood frozen, staring at Sarah's lifeless body, and for a brief moment something flickered in his eyes. Guilt? Regret? It was hard to tell, but it didn't last long. Across town, Richard Mitchell's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, saw David's name, and answered immediately. His face, which had been tight with anticipation, slowly relaxed into a smile. He hung up and turned to his wife Margaret and Jessica. "It's done. Sarah's gone. The baby's alive." Margaret exhaled a sound of pure relief and raised her champagne glass. To new beginnings. Jessica smiled, a calculated, cold smile, and clinked her glass against Margaret's. Finally. The 3 of them sat there in that apartment, celebrating a woman's death like it was some kind of victory. They talked about the future, about how David would raise the baby, about how Jessica would step in as the new Mrs. Mitchell, about how everything had worked out exactly as they planned. But back at the hospital, something was happening that none of them expected. Dr. Morrison was in the hallway, washing her hands, her mind still replaying every second of Sarah's delivery, trying to figure out what went wrong, what she could have done differently. That's when Nurse Linda approached her face pale, her voice shaking. "Dr. Morrison, you need to come back. Right now." The doctor turned, confused. "What is it?" Linda hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "There's another baby." Dr. Morrison froze. "What did you say?" "Another baby. It's twins. We didn't see the second one on the ultrasound. It was hidden behind the first. But it's here. And it's alive. The doctor's heart stopped. Twins. How did they miss it? How did every ultrasound, every checkup, every examination fail to catch that there were two babies, not one? She ran back to the delivery room, and there it was. A second baby, smaller than the first, but breathing, crying, very much alive. The medical team had already cleaned the baby up, a little boy, and he was lying in an incubator, his tiny chest rising and falling. Dr. Morrison stood there, staring at this child who shouldn't exist, this life that had appeared out of nowhere. And then it hit her. She had to tell David. She had to tell him that his wife hadn't just given birth to one baby before she died. She had given birth to two. David was in the waiting room, sitting alone, his head in his hands. He looked up when Dr. Morrison walked in, and for a moment he seemed almost hopeful, like maybe she was going to tell him it was all a mistake, that Sarah was okay. But the doctor's face said otherwise. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to talk to you." David stood, his body tense. "Is the baby okay?" "The baby is fine. Both babies are fine." David blinked. "What?" "It's twins, Mr. Mitchell. Your wife delivered twins. A girl and a boy. We didn't catch it on the ultrasound. I'm so sorry for your loss, but you need to know you have two children now." The color drained from David's face. Two? Two babies? He stumbled backward, grabbing the wall for support. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't part of the plan. One baby was manageable. One baby he could raise with Jessica, with his parents' help. But two? Two babies meant more responsibility, more complications, more questions. How was he going to explain this? How was he going to tell his parents, tell Jessica that everything had just gotten exponentially more complicated? He pulled out his phone with trembling hands and dialed his father's number. Richard answered on the first ring, his voice cheerful. "David, we're celebrating here. When are you coming over?" "Dad, there's a problem." Richard's smile faded. "What kind of problem?" "It's twins. Sarah had twins. There's two babies." Silence. The kind of silence that feels like the air has been sucked out of the room. Richard's hand tightened around his phone. "What do you mean, twins?" "Two babies, Dad. A girl and a boy. They didn't see it on the ultrasound. I just found out." More silence. Then a sharp exhale. "Stay there. Don't do anything. We're coming." 20 minutes later, Richard, Margaret, and Jessica walked through the hospital doors. They moved like a unit, their faces set in identical expressions of cold determination. They found David in the waiting room, and without a word, Richard grabbed his son's arm and pulled him into a private corner. Two babies. How the hell did this happen? "I don't know," David stammered. "They just told me." Margaret's eyes were sharp, calculating. "This changes everything." Jessica stood off to the side, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. She had signed up to be a stepmother to one baby, not two. And certainly not to twins who would forever be a reminder of Sarah, the woman she had helped destroy. "What do we do?" David asked, looking between his parents and Jessica. Richard's jaw clenched. "We figure it out. That's what we do. But first, we need to see these babies." They walked to the neonatal unit, and through the glass they saw them, two tiny infants, side by side in their incubators. The girl had Sarah's eyes. Even at just hours old, you could see it. The boy had David's chin. They were beautiful, innocent, completely unaware of the storm surrounding their arrival. Margaret stared at them, her expression softening for just a moment before hardening again. "They're so small. Can we really take care of two?" Jessica's voice cut through the quiet. "I didn't agree to this." Everyone turned to look at her. She met their eyes, unflinching. "I agreed to help raise one child. One. This is too much." Richard's eyes narrowed. "You're backing out?" Jessica shrugged. "I'm being realistic. Two babies, that's a full-time job, multiple full-time jobs, and I have my career, my life. I can't put everything on hold for this." Margaret's face flushed with anger. "You were perfectly happy to step in when it was convenient for you. Now when things get complicated, you want to run? That's not how this works." But Jessica had already made up her mind. "You all figure it out." I'm done." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the hospital floor, leaving the Mitchell family standing there in stunned silence. David watched her go, and part of him felt relief. Maybe this was better. Maybe he didn't need Jessica. Maybe he could do this on his own. But then reality set in. 2 babies, no mother, no partner, just him and his parents, who had orchestrated this whole mess in the first place. The next few days were chaos. The hospital wanted to know who would be taking the babies home. Social services got involved, asking questions, making sure the children would be properly cared for. David signed papers, made promises, assured everyone that he was ready to be a father. But late at night, when he was alone in his apartment, he broke down. He cried for Sarah, for the life they could have had, for the children who would grow up without their mother. And he hated himself. He hated that he had let his parents control him, that he had betrayed Sarah, that he had celebrated her death. Richard and Margaret, meanwhile, were already planning. They hired nannies, bought double of everything, turned David's spare bedroom into a nursery. They threw money at the problem, convinced that wealth could solve anything. But what they didn't account for was the guilt, the whispers, the judgment from everyone who knew what had happened. Sarah's family was devastated. Her mother, Patricia, showed up at the hospital demanding to see her grandchildren. She screamed at David in the hallway, calling him a murderer, a traitor, a monster. "How could you? How could you celebrate while my daughter died? Those babies are all I have left of her, and you're going to take them from me too?" Hospital security had to escort Patricia out, but her words stayed with David. They echoed in his mind every time he looked at his children. He saw Sarah in their faces, heard her voice in their cries, and he knew deep down that he could never escape what he had done. The twins came home 2 weeks later. David named the girl Emma, after Sarah's grandmother, a small gesture of guilt and remembrance. The boy he named Michael, a name his mother had suggested. The house was full of noise, crying, feeding schedules, diaper changes. The nannies worked around the clock, but even with all the help, David was exhausted. His parents visited daily, offering advice, criticism, control. Margaret would pick up Emma and coo at her, but there was something cold in her eyes, like she was holding a possession rather than a grandchild. Richard was worse. He barely looked at the babies, treating them like problems to be managed rather than lives to be cherished. And David? David went through the motions. He fed them, changed them, held them when they cried. But he felt nothing. Or maybe he felt too much. It was hard to tell. Months passed, the twins grew. Emma was quiet, observant, always watching everything with those big eyes that looked so much like Sarah's. Michael was louder, more demanding, always needing attention. David's life became a blur of sleepless nights and endless responsibility. He quit his job, unable to balance work and fatherhood. His parents supported him financially, but every dollar came with strings attached, with expectations, with control. And slowly, David started to realize that he was trapped by his choices, by his guilt, by the 2 tiny lives that depended on him. Sarah's mother never gave up. Patricia filed for custody, arguing that David was unfit, that he had been complicit in Sarah's death, that the children deserved better. The court case dragged on for months, ugly and painful. Lawyers presented evidence, witnesses testified, secrets were exposed. Jessica was called to the stand and admitted everything: the affair, the plan, the celebration. The courtroom gasped. The judge looked at David with disgust. But in the end, biology won. David was the father. And despite everything, despite his failures and his sins, the law gave him custody. Patricia collapsed in the courtroom, sobbing. She was granted visitation rights, but it wasn't enough. She wanted her grandchildren full-time, wanted to raise them the way Sarah would have wanted. But the system had spoken. The twins stayed with David. Years went by. Emma and Michael grew into bright, beautiful children. They asked about their mother, and David told them the truth, or at least a version of it. He told them that Sarah had loved them, that she had given her life to bring them into the world. He showed them pictures, told them stories, and slowly, painfully, he started to heal. But the guilt never left. Every birthday, every milestone, David thought about Sarah. He thought about the celebration in that apartment, about the champagne and the laughter while she lay dying. He thought about Jessica walking away, about his parents controlling everything, about how he had let it all happen. And he promised himself, promised Sarah's memory that he would do better, that he would be the father these children deserved. Richard and Margaret eventually backed off, realizing that their control was pushing David away. They saw their grandchildren on holidays, birthdays, special occasions, but the relationship was strained, cold, never what it could have been. Tell me in the comments, could you forgive someone who celebrated while your loved one died? What would you do if you were in David's position? Emma and Michael are 10 years old now. They're smart, kind, full of life. They visit their grandmother Patricia regularly, and she tells them stories about Sarah, keeps her memory alive. David watches them grow and sees Sarah in everything they do. And maybe, just maybe, that's his redemption. Not forgiveness, but the chance to honor her through the lives she created. The twins she never got to meet, but who carry her legacy forward every single day. This story isn't about happy endings. It's about consequences, about choices, about living with what you've done. David Mitchell made terrible decisions, and he'll carry that weight forever. But those two children, Emma and Michael, they're innocent. They're the light that came from darkness, the hope that emerged from tragedy. And maybe that's what matters most. Not what was lost, but what was saved. Two lives that almost weren't, two souls that exist because their mother loved them enough to give everything. That's the real story here. Not the celebration, not the betrayal, but the sacrifice. And the twins who will make sure their mother's memory never dies.